We are so far removed from the idea of America and its minarchism written in the United States Constitution, where we have to bring her back to where she belongs. Thank you for listening to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. Minarchists and libertarians alike, and welcome to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. Those of you that know, we are in the middle of our 6th series about building this minarchist state. This particular series is called Beyond the Shield. We're talking about a post-redrawn government, still based on the U.S. Constitution, but sticking to the principles of minarchy that is written in the United States Constitution. You can go back and reference earlier on this particular channel, starting with the series, What is Minarchy? Implementing Minarchy, how to implement it, what routes, it's all there. We've laid out so far. We've laid out the perfect state, the state that doesn't infringe upon individual freedom, a state that does not become that holds the monopoly on force, but only they are the arbiters of justice only. Before we get started, I need to go ahead and send y'all up here across the way. Make sure you have gone to check out torturelibertymedia.com. Make sure you've done that. Check out what we're about, the foundation, what our charter is for our 501c3 nonprofit media corporation. All the good stuff is here for you to observe. You can also check us out on Patreon. That's one of our main vehicles to push out content through written content, research papers now mainly. There'll be some news on there, but a lot of research papers will be going on that. So make sure you check us out on the Patreon. Also, please don't forget our flagship project called the 9th Amendment Project. This is going to be our major advocacy tool to shout down, call out all kinds of things that states and even the federal government is doing to subvert the 9th Amendment. Because remember, we have, again, as the 9th Amendment proclaims, we have rights that are retained by the people because they're not written in the Constitution. That doesn't mean they don't exist. And the government, both state and federal, love to step on those unenumerated rights or steal them at the first chance they get because people plead with them to give them that liberty. It is our job at the 9th Amendment Project to take that back from them, because those are our rights, not the government to dole them out on how they seem to deem fit. And you can see all the information I have written on this here about that particular thing. And there's some advocacy statements that you may be interested in reading, et cetera, et cetera. So take a gander at that, take a jump through that, and join us in the push to protect unenumerated rights given to us through the 9th Amendment in the United States Constitution. Now, let's get down to business. Make sure you did the like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Share it on your social media, share it with your friends on the phone, whatever the case may be. Let's get it out there so people can learn and maybe implement some of these things into their political life, their social life. Because at the end of the day, minarchy is the only thing at this point in time. Minarchy is the only thing that can set us free, because the state has its tentacles through everything that we do, from how long we can drive down the road, right? Even down to the price of gas, the state has control of, right? These things shall not be controlled by a government. That should be, those things need to be on a social scale, right? Bartering goods and services, right? So we've spent the last three episodes dismantling the state's monopoly on our communities, our courtrooms, and our livelihoods. Right? If we remember back in the Shield of Liberty series, right, we established the shield as a perimeter of defense. Okay, but whenever we talk about a minimal state, a specific kind of fear takes hold in the public consciousness, right? And it's called the compassion card. We hear it all the time, right? We're going to cut SNAP, right? No, you can't cut SNAP because some poor people just need the SNAP benefits, right? The compassion card, you know what I'm talking about, right? But inevitably, it's played by those that believe liberty and security are mutually exclusive. See, the skeptic will tell you, or they'll ask you the what about, right? The what aboutism questions, right? Like, if the shield is all we have, what happens to the sick? What happens to the elderly? What happens to the widow and the orphan if there's no Department of Health and Human Services to catch them, right? This fear, and we hear this all the time in many different forms on social media, even we have politicians on the TV, right? This fear mongering, right, is based on a massive technical historical amnesia, right? We've been conditioned to believe that the modern welfare state was a benevolent rescue mission for a helpless populace, right? And let me repeat that again for the people in the back, right? The welfare state of the day, the one post FDR, okay, is a benevolent rescue mission for helpless people. Who were the helpless people after FDR? And the government made sure it happened, right? Not saying it, but you know who it is. But what I will tell you is the data tells a completely different story in this regard, right? Because the welfare state was an experiment that didn't just fill a vacuum, right? It aggressively displaced centuries old ecosystems of voluntary, high trust cooperation, right? Communities, right? Because majority of your communities, we can go back at the start of the American Revolution in 1765, right? All the communities worked hand in hand. They bartered hand in hand. They didn't have money like we had today, bartered goods and services, right? And that system was going. I fix this, you give me this out your field, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That's how we lived life, right? But before the shield, right, expanded into a nanny, right? Americans didn't look to Washington, D.C. for security, right? They looked to the person sitting next to them in the meeting hall or their next door neighbor, right? They looked to fraternal societies, right? See, let's go back. Let's go back 115 years. Let's go back to the 19 teens, right? You were more likely to belong to a mutual benefit association than you were to hold a private insurance policy, right? Because these MBAs, there weren't charities, right, where people beg for scraps. These were sophisticated contractual networks of mutualism. And I'm going to get into that today, right? We're going to explore as the title says, mutual aid, the original safety net. We're going to reveal the robust private architecture that once made the American middle class the most resilient on earth, right? We're moving, we want to move the needle from compulsory entitlement of a government mandate to a contractual support of a free community. Remember, guys, like, share, subscribe, do all the things. Send it to your peoples. Maybe even link it later. I don't know. Whatever you got to do, right? Send it to your friends on TikTok. If you happen to be around those parts, do that too. Because look, we're talking building community, real community, not this government mandated, this government token of community, real community, like we used to have, right? Before the technocratic state took over, right? Before the Federal Reserve, all that is what we're talking about. Because again, at the end of the day, it's all about being left alone and the state doing what it's supposed to do and only what it's supposed to do. Anyway, let's talk about the economics of these fraternal societies, right? Or these MBAs, mutual benefit associations, right? If we look at the technical mechanics of how we used to care for each other, right? In the early 1900s, roughly, let's say 1/3 of American males belonged to a fraternal society, right? And the ones like the Odd Fellows, those of you that are old enough to remember things like that, the Grange, right? The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, right? These weren't just social clubs as they presented them through history. These were mutual benefit associations, right? See, we have to understand, right, the sheer efficiency of this model, right? Because remember, at the turn of the century, right, people, paid a membership fee or a subscription fee, often round totaling on average from what I could pull $2 to $3 a year, right? Or in essence, right, a day's wages for an entire year of coverage. And in return, right, these MBAs, they provided unemployment insurance, funeral benefits, full medical care, right? This is what I actually called. I kind of made up a word in this, right? Because y'all know I'm an etymology nerd, right? So I study, I've studied the words and how they came into existence down to the root, et cetera, et cetera. So I came up with a word called actual independence. It might be a word already because the American language is so vast, but I just made it up today. So it's a new word. If I'm saying that you've never heard it, it's a new word to you too. Haha. But these groups, right? These MBAs, these lodge practices, right? They didn't rely on state subsidies. They managed their own risk pools through social pressure and community knowledge, right? And in fact, they were actually self-insured collectives, right? Now, let's compare this to the current the current state that we have, right? Now we know about FDR. We know what he did, right? And Social Security, right, was one of those, right? Social Security in 1935, and there was a bill also in 1974 people probably never heard of called ERISA, ERISA, which actually means Employee Retirement Income Security Act and it was passed in 1974, right? And this law in particular, those of you that are not familiar, this is the federal law that established minimum standards for private sector retirement, health, and disability plans, right? And these guarantees, a lot of these guarantees were paid through the PBGC, Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. But that's a whole nother story, right? So these are the two things that destroyed, right, these MBAs, right? Because speaking of ERISA, right, ERISA, right, it imposed also a massive regulatory burden that favored large, centralized insurance corporations and made the MBA or lodge model, in some cases called, technically non-compliant. Right? Think about that a minute. Society has already set up, yeah, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be a part of a mutual aid society and we're just going to help each other, this, that, and the third, whatever. And the federal government, right? The federal government comes in and says, you cannot commune with your neighbor or your fellow shoe shiner or your fellow car porter or your fellow concierge group, right? You can't have your own insurance benefit amongst yourselves and all that stuff. We're making you non-compliant by passing this law. Think about that a second. The government telling you what, who, what, and how you can associate. Why do you think, right? This law right here, ERISA, this law right here is the exact reason why. And I know the political leftists talk about, oh, the health insurance is healthcare is too expensive, but they don't talk about the health insurance. ERISA is the law that helped the health insurance industry monopolize upon itself and say we control the premiums. And then the ACA made it worse, didn't it? Just pointing out the king obvious. They don't talk about these things because these people don't know about these things, right? They just go off what they're being told and they don't go, look, why did it get there? ERISA is one of those things that caused insurance. Once they consolidated in a way and they centralized it, they controlled your pocketbook and destroyed any type of mutual aid you wanted to be a part of, right? But really, right? Think about this a minute. The real killer of the MBAs was the crowding out effect, right? Think about it a minute. When the state uses the power of the purse to provide a free service funded by taxation, it annihilates the private market, does it not? Again, right? Let's go back to the ACA. What did the ACA do when it passed, right? They literally caused private insurance companies to raise their weight their premiums, right? Literally making the government the best gig in town. Hmm? After they gave them the power to consolidate through ERISA. I hope y'all catching what I'm putting down. I hope y'all understanding what I'm putting down right now, right? Okay, let me slow down. So think about this a minute, right? If you're already paying 15% of your income into a compulsory federal program, right? Your disposable income to fund a private lodge disappears, doesn't it? The state didn't prove it was better. It just simply made it too expensive for the individual to maintain their own safety net. Makes you dependent on the government, right? Now I'm going to throw this out there, right? In our minarchist state that we've created for almost a year, right? Gosh, hard to believe it's almost a year we've been building this minarchist country, right? In a minarchist state, the state provides the shield, which would be the courts, to ensure the funds aren't embezzled, but stays out of the service itself, right? A decentralized network of independent lodges is technically more resilient than one giant federal agency. I think we agree on that, right? By removing the compulsory tax, right, we would restore the financial, I think what word I'm looking for, oxygen, right? The financial oxygen voluntary to communities that need to actually breathe through this, right? because if we had mutual, I want y'all to think about this a minute, right? If we had mutual aid programs, let's say in the inner cities, right? You know how much better off the inner cities would be? How much better off they would be if they could just pull their money together and then create this mutual aid thing and everybody gets a good benefit from it. Government doesn't want people doing for themselves, right? Now, let's get further into this a second, right? So people, opponents of our model, right, would probably ask if lodge practice was so effective, or MBAs, right, was so effective, why is it gone, right? And I will answer that 100%, 10 toes down. It wasn't a market failure. It's a case, in fact, of regulatory capture, right? Let's walk through this a minute, right? In the early 20th century, I want to say 19. I'm not. I'm trying to remember what year the AMA became a thing. I want to say 1940s, 1950s. Don't quote me exactly, right? But in the earlier 20th century, the AMA actually realized that competitive bidding for fraternal contracts, right, these mutual aid societies, was keeping doctors' salaries in check and consumer prices low. Now, to an economist, I'm not an econ guy, right? But I would think that's a pretty healthy market. Anybody with any common sense or any little bit of econ experience would that's a healthy market. You have the people keeping the insurance in check, right? Keeping the doctors in check and still have to provide a great service in order to get that money. I think that's pretty healthy, right? But to a group like the AMA or the APA, it's a threat, right? It was so much of a threat that the AMA started lobbying state governments to pass laws that effectively criminalized the lodge model or the MBAs. They actually did that, right? They branded what these mutual aid societies did as unprofessional conduct, in turn, pressuring state medical boards to revoke the licenses of any doctor who signed a contract with an MBA. How dirty is that? I mean, let's think about how dirty is that? Now, after all that happened, the APA did the same thing, right? And now you got to have your licensing through through the American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, right? To it's more than I can write down here or even speak on here. My mind goes in 60 directions on how this is so authoritarian, right? But I'm gonna leave that alone. Let's look at the current standard, right? These things that the APA and the AMA did, right, was codified into federal legislation, the McCarran-Ferguson Act of 45, right, which exempted state level insurance cartels from antitrust laws. Let me say that again. In 1945, they passed a law that exempted state level insurance cartels from antitrust laws. Hmm. And with this, starting in 45, with the McCarran-Ferguson Act, right? This led us directly to the ACA, right? Let's put this together, right? Because under the ACA, right, the low cost fraternal model or the MBA model, right, is technically illegal because it doesn't meet the mandate for essential health benefits, right? So now the government can dictate exactly what a health plan must cover, replacing your freedom of association with a mandatory subscription. So much for freedom, right? This is what the United States government and the federal government did to us. Let's talk about our minarchist state a second, right? Because always got to have the solution in a minarchist state because this is our country we're building, right? In a minarchist society, that monopoly wouldn't exist; it would be dismantled, right? Because we would literally strip the state of its power to define what is or is not professional, right? If for example, if a group of neighbors, right, I went down up and down US 41, right, down my house through Floral City down to Brooksville, right, and I got a group of people together, right, and we pulled resources to hire a doctor at a flat fee contract, right. That would be a private covenant, right, as it should be. Then we replace the state mandated certificates of need, which hospitals actually use to block new competitors, with the reputation market, right? Because again, remember the shield, in this case, the shield's only job is to ensure the doctor doesn't commit malpractice or fraud. That's it, right? That's it. That's how it should be. Freedom of association. You choosing who your provider is going to be, right? So many people are scared of that. So many people are scared to be guided without the government. Like, like they can't. We see them all the time. They can't think for themselves. Oh no, the government has to do it, or I'm gonna get a politician, get somebody to do it, right? Uh, See this, and with this, right? This actually leads us to the most critical pivot, right? And this separates the men from the boys, right? The women from the girls, right? Understanding the difference between public entitlement and private covenant, right? Legally and technically, the idea that Social Security is a locked box is a myth designed to mask a transfer of power and wealth from the individual to the administrator, right? Because under this standard, let's remember, right? Social Security is not a contract, right? And this was actually settled. I want to say was it 19. I think was this case was 1960 Fleming versus Nestor. Yeah, Fleming versus Nestor was 1960, right? And that court ruled that workers have no accrued property right to their benefits because it's an administrative entitlement, right? Congress has the only the reserved power to alter, amend, or repeal the act, right? Obviously at any time. So in the eyes of the law, you aren't a policyholder. You are a beggar at the table of the state, subject to administrative discretion. So how do we fix that problem? How do we fix that problem? This is what we do. This is what we do, people. Right? In our minarchist framework, a mutual aid benefit is an equitable interest, right? And it is also a contractual right backed by the shield, right? So when we're talking on the ownership side of this contract, right? When you pay into a MBA, right, a mutual benefit association. I know I keep saying it because when I say MBA, some people minds go to Masters in Business Administration, right? That's not we're not talking finance, right? When you pay into a MBA, you're purchasing a share of a private risk pool. That share, right, is your private property, right? Unlike, as I again, right, described the Nestor, that even though you're paying into Social Security and that Social Security benefits you, it's not an accrued property right. As opposed to the NBA, it is your property, right? Now, if the your NBA, right, fails to pay out, right, you don't petition a bureaucrat, unlike Social Security, right? You sue for breach of contract in the courts, right? Because what have we said multiple times on chasing life, liberty, and minarchy? What are the three functions of the government? To see the logical conclusion of justice, right? To uphold property rights, right? And what's the last one? To uphold contracts. That's their only job, right? That's their only job. See, mutual aid solved the problems of adverse selection through social capital because historically, fraternal lodges and these mutual aid associations required a vetting process, right? Because members knew each other, they could identify bad actors in ways a faceless federal agency never could. We are replacing the political promise, right, of benefit of such with the legal guarantee that it has to be produced, right? I hope y'all enjoyed the dialogue, the conversation this evening. I appreciate y'all taking your time out of your day. I want to give a quick shout out before we close out to everybody in the live chat on Twitch, on Kick, right here on Rumble. Um, those on Facebook watching it. I want to shout out to my public radio stations in South Florida, South Georgia, Oklahoma, and the great state I'm still partial to, the Beehive State, the Utah. Appreciate all y'all supporting the show and all that today. Now, in closing, right, when we move beyond the shield, we have to confront a hard truth. Okay, the life in our title is too important to be outsourced to a faceless federal agency in a different time zone, different area, whatever, right? We've been conditioned to believe that the safety net must be made of government wire, but a net made of wire eventually becomes a cage, doesn't it? Think about when you go crabbing. The best analogy: if you go crabbing, you obviously you go crabbing. Most people with not too much cloth anymore, but with the metal, right? What happens? You set the wire down, you put the benefit in the middle, the crabs come up to grab it, and what happens? You pull it up and it forms a cage. This is what we're talking about, right? This is what we're talking about. The technical reality we've uncovered today is that the state didn't just step in because the market failed. The state used its shield as a sword to decapitate the competition, to destroy the lodge practice, destroy the MBAs, destroy the fraternal societies that gave the working class true economic independence. They replaced, listen, I hope y'all following me. It's hitting my head real quick here. They replaced your contractual rights with administrative discretion. They traded your sovereignty for a subscription that the Supreme Court says the state doesn't even have to honor. Right? In our minarchist model, in our minarchist state that we've created, right? Being a maximal individual doesn't mean being a hermit. It means being a mutualist. It means recognizing that the true security doesn't come from a tax funded promise, it comes from the architecture of consent. right? It's the lodges, the unions, the voluntary associations, the MBAs, and everything all above, where every member is a stakeholder, not a statistic. When we build these private safety nets, we're rebuilding the social fabric that the nanny state has spent centuries unraveling. I hope you're hearing me. So I have a challenge for you. And you don't have to produce this at any other time, whatever. This is just for you, right? I want you to go, if you've done your genealogy, right? Look for, look for fraternal societies in your family tree. I bet you all of us have them. If our families have been here for at least 3 to 4 generations, they're probably in your family tree, right? Go find the birth certificates they may have held, right? And just observe that history. Look up the history of the MBAs, the lodges, those fraternal societies, as I was mentioning, right? And how the AMA fought to make it unethical, right, for a doctor to offer affordable care, right? Because once you do that and you realize the safety net was stolen and sold back to you as a government program, you'll understand why people like me scream up and down about government staying out of our society and how we build our society. People scream about healthcare this and government. No, stop. You get the government out of healthcare. We can do what we need to do to to help each other through this healthcare thing, but we don't need the government to dictate to us and the government to pay the enemy to get at us. Remember, the state itself is a shield for defense, okay? But only a free community can provide a cradle for life. Listen, I'm glad y'all stayed with us today. Hope y'all learned a little something. Go back and listen to it again. Share it with your peeps, share it with your friends, all that good stuff, right? Because we're almost coming to the end of this series, but Beyond the Shield. Almost coming to the end, but we have another one coming up. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but we're going to get after it because, as you heard me say earlier, and I'll say it again, Minarchy is literally the only thing that can save us right now. And I don't care how quickly we got to break the state down and bring it to its knees, but it has to be done. Or before we know it, within 2 generations, this will be a completely authoritarian society. And our kids and our grandkids and our great grandkids don't deserve that. They don't deserve that. Because Lord willing, us Gen Xers, most of us Gen Xers that are listening, that listen and watch this show, we're the last common sense generation. We're it. If we don't fix this now, what legacy do we leave for our kids and grandkids and great grandkids? What legacy do we leave? Remember, next Sunday, join us for episode 5. I've called it Sound Money and Stable Liberty, where we will discuss why the shield of liberty is useless if the state can devalue your labor through the printing process. Until next time, remember, love your neighbors, love your family, but ultimately, love yourselves. Have a great weekend.